How's it going? Guys hear my voice? All right, so let's see what we've got. Turn it up a little bit. Can y'all hear my voice? Say yeah. Good? Let's do this. Check it. I'm about to spit it, never bringing you tedium, cause I gotta make myself the real lyrical medium. Always got it, never stop it, no it never gets ugly. Coming from another country, getting rugged as rugby. They never gonna stop me, no, not even a little bit. No, I'm up on stage, but don't see if I am ticklish. No, I got a style they can't dare to throttle. Did philosophy and read all of my Aristotle. Plus they know it's very evil, while he's stunning like Knievel. While I'm standing on the steeple and I'm kind of medieval. It's kind of old school, what I might outdo ya. Word to the fish, do they have a beluga? I'm really not sure, but they know this is my station, rocking for another nation, and I'm getting information. No, I gotta spit it, not about the quick cash, just making a record and I'm causing some whiplash. No, I gotta spit it so you stand to see, command the beat, and this is my philanthropy. I spit it for the human race, so you best believe that. And back in 7th grade, I was singing Lean Back. No, I gotta kill it live. They know I gotta spit it every minute when I'm in it. No, I rock it so specific. They know I gotta spit it till I'm octogenarian and got words like librarians. It's old school, but I spit the truth, sticking to my roots, and I prove that I do it from here back to Beirut. No, I really keep it grisly. It's kind of shifty. These other rappers never, ever, ever, ever outspit me. No, you got a question? Well, rap's the answer. I think these fish wanna be my backup dancers. No, I got the style when I'm ripping it live. I gotta kill it. No, it's really never, ever sounding jive. No, we only really bring the best to ya. I flew way in from Philadelphia to see you de las artes y ciencia here at TEDxBerkleeValencia. Thank you. Thank you. So, you know how parents say things like, you shouldn't just expect to wake up one day and expect to know exactly what you're going to do for the rest of your life? I think it was the day after they said that I woke up and decided I wanted to be a rapper. What fascinated me was that, like other genres, hip-hop is incredibly complex. To freestyle, you obviously have to be able to process information. And I was stunned by the fact that rappers would get on stage and freestyle and didn't even seem to break a sweat. It amazed me. What they did was so sophisticated, but they made it look so simple. I set out to try and figure out how to do it myself. Now, when you're 10 years old, you're the son of 2 lawyers, and you want to be a rapper, what do? Research. So I watched every YouTube video on the face of the earth that involved freestyle rapping. I went to shows, and when the shows were over, I would ask the rappers how they do what they do when they perform live. And it's kind of ironic to me that as poets, the only thing that they didn't know how to put into words was their own thought process. So I thought about it some more, and I realized that for years, I had had this sort of naive assumption that any problem in life, no matter how difficult, could be solved just by thinking hard enough, by concentrating intently enough. And I guess the irony on my part was that I eventually came to realize that these rappers weren't so good because they were thinking harder. They had actually taught themselves how to think less. They were able to step back. They were able to let the words flow through them. Their intuitions were guiding them. And as I improved, as I kept working, I noticed that I was adjusting to the terrain of rhymes and rhythms. In fact, 4 years after I began, when I got up and did my first performance at the 8th grade talent show, there must have been 600 kids there, my entire school. I had nothing with me. No note cards, notebooks, no words, nothing. I had a microphone and my wits. And I was surprised to find the words actually came to me. I mean, the first word that came to me was run, but after that, the rest of them were pretty good. I even started to win battles of my own. My intuitions had sharpened and improved. So, quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you're an artist of any kind, a musician, composer, singer, painter, whatever. Wow, this really is the Berklee College of Music. How many of you, musicians, artists or not, have ever had the feeling that you know what to do in a certain situation? You have a hunch, even if you don't exactly know why you have it. Yeah, that's many of you. As artists, we understand as well as anyone the feeling that Malcolm Gladwell called knowing without knowing how. Humanity has pretty much understood that intuition is a big part of our lives for a long time. The most famous tale in the Western world, the Odyssey, begins with Homer summoning the muse to his lips for inspiration, a term that literally meant breathing in, as in breathing in divine knowledge. As artists, we fantasize about the idea of a masterpiece coming to us in a dream. And we all regularly use metaphors involving the idea of something coming over us or flowing through us and giving us knowledge from somewhere else. We understand that there is a powerful primal urge churning all the time just beneath conscious awareness. So what is this thing? Well, I think the problem with intuition is that it's elusive. Perhaps the fact that we're so close to it and that it's so central to our lives makes it hard for us to step back and get a good look at it. Well, when you want to figure out what something is, I think it helps to start by looking at what it is not. So let's talk about two common misconceptions that I think people have about intuition. One, that intuition is somehow fundamentally beyond us, that we can't understand it. The second is that using your intuition is somehow opposite to using reason, that intuition is even inherently irrational, and that you're either a creative, disorderly, chaotic, intuitive person on one hand, or conceptual and rational and analytical and structured on the other. As for the first one, our ancestors seem to believe something along those lines. They believed that intuition had to come from the divine. The Greeks consulted oracles and looked for signs and clues hidden in nature, left there by the gods to help them predict the future. Milton summed it up nicely in Paradise Lost, when the angel tells Adam that logic is the language of man and intuition the language of heaven. Then came the 20th century, with the discovery of the unconscious, the idea that the mind has a mind of its own. For the last century, psychologists, neuroscientists, and economists have been hard at work challenging the traditional notion that the rational mind has full control over our behavior. They've even chalked the mind up into two parts. One we call fast thinking. It's the part that makes quick decisions, it's associative, it's reflexive, intuitive, you might say. The other is slow thinking. It's deliberate, controlled. It asks us to pump the brakes and think carefully about our situation. Unfortunately, I think that there's still some stigma in intellectual circles about intuition. Some people look down on it and think it's something to approach with disdain. It's often still commonly associated with errors, fallacious reasoning. The main example being a stockbroker who refuses to give up a bad share because he can't let go of it, even though he knows it's on the decline. But I think there's so many other cases out there that haven't really been examined closely yet. And a new wave of research really excites me because it suggests, which I would argue, that intuition also makes us creative, and that when used properly, it can even make us more effective. So imagine that you're looking up and a ball is flying at your face, and you reach out and you catch it. You're not thinking too much, but things are sort of shimmering in your consciousness. Mostly, throw your hand up now. Or imagine that you're looking at a piece of art and you're thinking, it doesn't quite hang together so well. Or you're listening to a piece of music and you say, yeah, that instrument is exactly where it belongs. Do these all have something in common? I would argue that they do. Consider the concept of muscle memory. We usually talk about muscle memory in reference to playing sports or playing instruments. But what about pattern recognition, decision-making? In those cases, aren't we relying on something similar to muscle memory? Except in all the above cases, the muscle that's doing the remembering isn't a hand or a foot, it's the brain. I think what's happening is that the brain has gotten really good over long periods of time at recognizing patterns, storing them in an unconscious model of the world, and then drawing all that information in situations that seem familiar to us. So our unconscious brain will tug at our sleeve and strongly recommend a course of action based on something that it's seen before. We like to think that as artists, we often create our own ideas, and much of the time we do. But sometimes, our ideas are good at creating themselves. That's why I would suggest that we might define intuition as the brain's ability to recognize and respond to patterns with minimal conscious effort. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise that intuitions are so useful and so central to the way that we think. After all, they're part of our evolutionary heritage. In ancient times, it helps to know whether a fruit is safe to eat, to be able to get a quick look at it and decide if it's poisonous or not, to be able to, on the fly, read a facial cue by somebody from a different tribe, or to be able to look at a shark and, figure out whether he looks extra hungry today. That goes a long way to helping you survive. In fact, I would argue that they still help us in modern times. Musicians still use intuition to avoid going hungry by writing popular music. Consider the following example. Imagine you're at the drawing board and you're trying to write your most fundamental, basic pop song. It has 4 chords. Each of those chords is going to be based on one of 12 notes in the chromatic scale. That means that the number of possible chord progressions for your most basic pop song is 12 to the 4th power. That's almost 22,000 different combinations. And that's leaving out all the fancy stuff they teach you at Berkeley. I mean, that by itself is so much. It would take a lifetime to do. It would be absurd. Thankfully, that's not actually the way that we approach these problems. We rely on our gut feelings. We think about previous instances that have been successful in the past, maybe something we were practicing a few hours before. We let the brain spit that out, and we put it on the drawing board, and we start to tweak it as needed. In fact, I would argue that that's what it means to have a sense of style. Having a style is like a 25 most played in the brain. It's your unique collection of experiences and reactions stored within you that you can draw on intuitively to solve creative problems in the future. Everyone has a unique signature of intuition, and that's their personal style. And mine? Well, mine is freestyle. I think that this can even help to explain why some people are so good at what they do, exceptionally so, on the level of experts, and not just in the things that we traditionally associate with creativity, even in some of the more rational or analytical walks of life. There's sort of a stereotype out there that logical thinking is detached, cold, impersonal, even robotic. But so many of the most interesting and insightful discoveries in mathematics, many of which required novel proofs, relied on and were propelled by something closer to artistic imagination. After all, before you can calculate and put out numbers, it helps to actually have something in front of you, to be able to imagine something to work with, to steer the direction that your logic goes in. I think that's why mathematician Henri Poincaré said, "It is by logic that we prove, but by intuition that we discover." Einstein knew quite well the feeling of intuitive certainty. He claimed to have often thought in nonverbal terms about physical structures in the universe, and he even played the violin as he worked to gather inspiration. He even suggested that thinking about the patterns of music flowing through space and time might have helped him to think of the idea of relativity. Now, as I said before, I think intuition can be hugely useful for people who are trying to become experts. If you still think intuition is irrational, consider the fact that expert golfers hardly think about their moves as they play, and that unlike novices who benefit from the extra time, they actually thrive when they have less of a chance to think. In fact, neuroscientists in Tokyo have studied the brains of Japanese shogi players, a board game similar to chess. And what they found is that in addition to answering questions about the moves on the board on the fly, there's an area of the brain that's especially active called the caudate nucleus, which tends to be associated with automatic behavior. In fact, as novices train over a 15-week period, they notice that in addition to having quicker and more effective, successful responses to questions about the board, that area of the brain becomes more active for them as well when they're thinking. I think a very useful interpretation of this is that the brain learns to take important information, patterns, reflexes, and it saves them in the hardware of the deep brain. You might use the metaphor of dropping a pin or bookmarks, whatever you want. But the idea is that the brain is good at storing shortcuts, and that we can access that information easily to bypass the slowness of conscious, deliberate thought. In fact, when rappers and jazz musicians were asked to have their brains scanned while improvising at Johns Hopkins, it was found that areas of their brain were less active involving self-censorship and self-judgment, and areas were more active involving self-expression. The scientists even suggested that their brains looked as though they were dreaming. So when we put this all together, I think what it suggests to us is that experts are exceptional at their crafts, not because they think harder necessarily, but because their intuitions are sharper. One, this can help them to think of effective solutions on the fly. And two, when they do have time to think, it means that they can spend more time thinking about the more complex aspects of their craft, maybe building a strategy. So, for example, in my case, let's say I wanted to do a quick freestyle couplet for you guys right now. What's the first word that comes to mind? Intuition, obviously, because that's the talk. What does intuition rhyme with? With precision, disposition, intermission, big collision. I guess disposition works, so I'll go with disposition. Now I need to think of subject matter. Well, I can talk about how I can use my intuition because we're rappers and we all love to talk about ourselves. So I'll say something like, freestyling live is my main disposition. Really comes easy because I use my intuition. That would be an example. I can spend time thinking about the subject matter because I can delegate figuring out what rhymes with what to my unconscious self, to the automatic parts of the brain, if you will. Now, imagine the case of an athlete, somebody who once upon a time was afraid of the ball. Well, this guy is obviously not afraid of the ball anymore. He can throw his hand out and catch it, and he can even do crazy things with it the rest of us can only dream of. He didn't just learn to trump that older, more primitive intuition, though. They were replaced deliberately with new ones that are useful to the craft and that help to propel him in the direction that he needs. That's why I think that if we want to be able to unleash our intuitions, it helps to be able to hone them. That's where conscious thought comes back in. And I think there are 3 ways we can do this. 1, we can approach our intuitions not as final products, but as first drafts. We can think mindfully about them in the heat of the moment, see how they're working, see what we're thinking, what our gut feelings are telling us, decide which of them are most useful for the task at hand, and then weave those together into a strategy, much like a coach, I guess. The second example would be something closer to gardening, training our intuitions over the long term. If it's true that our brains store information, almost like reflexes, and bookmark them, then it makes sense that we want to feed our brains the best information and patterns and technique possible. Much like a gardener would, we want to be able to water the plants, feed them, and give them time to grow. Then, with the proper amount of time, they might be able to cultivate new and diverse ideas and responses for us. Just as they say that in war, the battle is over before the first shot is even fired, I think that when it comes to rap battles, it helps to really know how to go about navigating the web of words and rhymes, and to be practiced and ready for the moment that you're there to let it go. Third, if you want to know how your intuitions work, experiment with them. Put yourself under pressure, improvise, face new challenges. The US government runs complex, expensive war game simulations to practice and prepare the readiness of the military. And American medical students will sometimes simulate mass casualty events while wearing GoPro cameras on their heads. Then when the event is over, they'll watch themselves on camera, they'll observe their mistakes, and then they'll deliberately try to correct them in follow-up simulations. Similarly, I think that if you want to get better, you have to know what your intuitions are like, and that means putting yourself under pressure. Not because thinking isn't useful, but because it's when you don't have the opportunity to think that you really get a chance to see what's going on beneath the surface. Our intuitions are hugely important to us. They can fill in the details that logical models don't always have the ability or time to capture. And they can notice beautiful little details that fly under the radar of reason. But my message is not down with logic. Instead, I think we need to craft a more sophisticated relationship between intuition and reason, and to see them not as competitors, but as complements. Intuition is the backbone of reason. The question is, how do we use it more wisely? In other words, check it. I'm about to spit it while I show you all my disposition. The real key is learning to use your intuitions. So what if it happens unconsciously? That doesn't mean that it's going down thoughtlessly. Whether physics, art, maybe in mathematics, there's always something propelling our mental acrobatics. They evolved to keep us alive, used to help us survive. That's an instinct we got from the hive. And they can make your thoughts come in a quick blast. To think fast, how to get past each impasse. When you're with an expert, you'll usually tell, because they're still using impulse, but using it well. And this real life demands all that you've got. It happens just a little too fast for logical thought. If it seems overwhelming, you've only got to take a deep breath. To improve, follow these 3 steps. 1, while it might be kind of tempting to work fast, helps when you use your gut feelings as first draft. 2nd, teach them the method. Try to download the technique and leave time to perfect it. 3, practice in novel simulations to see how you behave in problem situations. So when you're pressured and there's work to do, learn how to make your intuitions work for you. Thank you.